What strategy did the colonial masters use to conquer Africans and establish hegemony of power of Africans? European colonial powers used a combination of military force, political manipulation, economic control, cultural influence, and psychological domination to conquer African societies and establish long-term hegemony over the continent. The process was deliberate and systematic. Here are some of the major strategies they used. Divide and rule. Colonial powers exploited ethnic, tribal, regional, and political differences among African communities. Instead of allowing unity, they encouraged suspicion and rivalry between groups. Some groups were favored with education, military positions, or administrative power, while others were marginalized. This weakened collective resistance among Africans. A well-known example was how the British often governed indirectly through selected chiefs, creating loyal elites who depended on colonial authority. The second major strategy was military superiority. European powers used advanced weapons, technology, organized armies, and modern warfare technologies against African kingdoms and communities that often relied on traditional weapons. Resistance movements were crushed violently. Events such as the Battle of Umdurman and the defeat of the Zulu War demonstrated how technological military advantage enabled conquest. The third major strategy that European colonial powers used was economic control. Colonial governments took control of land, minerals, labor, and trade routes. Africans were forced into labor systems, taxation, and cash crop economies designed to benefit Europe rather than local development. Colonial economies were structured so that Africa exported raw materials and imported finished goods, creating long-term dependency. The fourth strategy was missionary and educational influence. Missionaries introduced Christianity and Western education. While many missionaries genuinely cared for the people and contributed positively through schools and hospitals, colonial systems also used education to reshape African worldviews and create a class of Africans trained to support colonial administration. Many Africans were taught to admire European culture while viewing their own tradition as being inferior. The fifth major strategy that the European colonial masters used was psychological and cultural domination. Colonialism was not only political, it was psychological. Africans were often portrayed as uncivilized in order to justify conquest. Language, dress, religion, and systems of governance, which were from Europe, were elevated above African systems. Over time, many people internalized colonial ideas about power, identity, and development. This is why discussions about mental decolonization remain important today. Number 6, manipulation through treaties. Some colonial powers signed deceptive treaties with African leaders. Many agreements were misunderstood, mistranslated, or made under pressure. These treaties were later used by Europeans to claim sovereignty over territories. Number 7, control through infrastructure. Roads, rails, ports, and communication systems were built mainly to extract resources and move troops efficiently. Infrastructure often saved colonial economic interests first rather than African self-development. 8, creation of artificial borders. During the Berlin Conference, European nations divided Africa with little regard for ethnic, cultural, or historical realities. This created many tensions that continued after independence. The 9th major strategy that European colonial masters used was use of local collaborators. Colonial authorities often relied on local intermediaries, chiefs, interpreters, soldiers, and elites to enforce colonial rule. This reduced the cost of administration and helped legitimize foreign control. And lastly, 10, long-term dependency structures. Even after political independence, many African nations remained economically dependent on former colonial powers through date systems, trade patterns, multinational corporations, and foreign influence in government. This is often discussed under the idea of neo-colonialism. Many African thinkers such as Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Kenneth Kaunda, Frantz Fanon, and Patrick Lumumba argued that true freedom required not only political freedom, but also economic, cultural, and psychological liberation. At the same time, Africa's history is also a story of resilience. Kingdoms, communities, churches, intellectuals, and liberation movements across the continent resisted colonial domination in different ways, preserving identity, dignity, and hope for self-determination. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to this highlight that responds to the question, what strategy did the colonial masters use to conquer Africa and establish hegemony of power over Africans? A system that has not totally faded away, but still shows itself at different times within the history of the African people. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to this podcast as we reflected on Africa Freedom Day. My name is Reverend Chala Habasila. Have a blessed day.